Well, good evening, Manchester and surrounding cities. It is Wednesday, September 12th, 7 o'clock in the evening, so it's time for the Progress Report live with Bob Backus. As you may be aware, I am not Bob Backus. I'm Mike Farley. I'm here sitting in for Bob. He's running a little bit late, had some other obligations, but we expect him to show up soon. You may or may not have heard that we had a pretty big day in politics yesterday here in New Hampshire and here in Manchester, and that's going to be the topic of our conversation here tonight, yesterday's primary election, and our guest is going to be Gene Martin, chairman of the Manchester City Democrats, and no better person to have here in the studio to break down the numbers and talk about where we go from here after yesterday's primary. But as has been the tradition since the beginning of 2017, we are going to begin the show with a very brief POTUS report on the Progress Report, and that will be brought to you by me, as it usually is. So let's get started with that. I guess I just wanted to start by saying, you know, there's a lot of distractions that are going on. It's very hard to keep track of what's going on down in Washington, in particular with this administration. And it doesn't look like that's going to change soon. Right now, we have a hurricane barreling down on North and South Carolina that could be devastating, and you know, all the news is focusing on that and FEMA's preparedness. And but we can't forget that there are other things going on at the same time. Not the smallest among them, the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, which is still chugging along in the Senate. You know, that's become more and more of an issue. There's some suggestion that he may have been less than truthful with the Senate, not only in this round, but in previous rounds, and documents are starting to come out, and they may or may not affect his nomination and his approval by the Senate. But the point is that that's still going on, and other very, very important things are going on while we pay attention to the latest shiny object sometimes. One of the things you may have heard is some news that not immediately recently, but over the course of the summer, some $10 million was transferred out of the FEMA budget and transferred into the ICE budget. A lot of people on the news are comparing, you know, bringing that up because it kind of coincides with this Hurricane Florence coming aboard and FEMA's in the limelight. But that really, I think that's a false connection, because this all took place before, and it's nothing nefarious. It happens all the time. Both of these organizations are within the Department of Homeland Security, and I can remember when I was on the Hillsborough County Executive Committee, that's pretty much all we did at our monthly meetings, was transfer funds from one budget area to another, where they weren't needed to where they were needed. So it's not an uncommon thing, and certainly $10 million is not a big deal to the FEMA budget. But don't be distracted. Don't think that this is going to impact what happens with Hurricane Florence, because it won't. What it is going to impact is what's going on our southern border. And you thought that was done, but there's still a couple hundred kids that haven't been reunited with their parents. And this money is going to build further detention centers because, as we understand it, the administration is going to challenge the consent decree that requires that children intercepted at the border be held in the least restrictive means possible, and basically disobey it and take it up on appeal where they think they'll get a more sympathetic judge. So what we're going to see, folks, and this $10 million is just the beginning of it, is we're going to see more kids being locked up, only they will be locked up with their parents at the very least, but still being locked up. So, folks, keep your eyes open. Don't let the distractions take your eye off the ball. There's a lot going on, and we're going to try to bring as much of that to you as we can here on the Progress Report on a weekly basis. So that's the POTUS report on the Progress Report. And now, I'm out of breath from talking so much, so I'm going to recruit some help from my good friend, Gene Martin. Gene, welcome to the Progress Report. Gene is the chairman of the Manchester City Democrats. Gene was working 36 hours a day. How is that possible? Gene can do it. 36 hours a day helping Democrats put on good campaigns in these primaries. And he'll certainly be working even more, 48 hours a day, as we go forward to the general election in November. So, Gene, welcome to the Progress Report.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
We're very happy to have you. It's, I think, your first visit to the show.
My first. I've been a long-time fan, first time here.
Well, we're very happy to have you, and we do hope that you'd consider coming on periodically to keep us updated, because we focus on Manchester, and you're the guy in Manchester. So
happy to do it.
We're looking forward to your insight. But before we do, we have a philosophy here on the Progress Report. Everything that's done in politics is done by people. So we want to learn about you as a person. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you got involved in politics? And I know the story, so I'll be able to check if you're telling the truth.
So I moved to Manchester. My family did. We were in sixth grade, and so I've lived here for just over 20 years. Born in Massachusetts, and had a tough childhood. Like so many families across New Hampshire, my mom, struggled with sort of a substance abuse crisis, and we were in a homeless shelter. So really, for me, being part of the Democratic Party is a really personal story, and I think when politicians talk about running for office and passing good legislation, I'm the kind of person that they are hoping to help all the G. Martins and Jane Does of the world. And so moved to Manchester. My parents wanted to have a good life for their 3 kids. We moved to Ward 8, great ward. Used to vote for you all the time when I was there, had yard signs, all that sort of stuff. And so loved Manchester, went to high school here, graduated from Memorial, and went to Plymouth State University, got a degree, got involved with politics. But it was really in high school, it was Howard Dean's campaign that really got me excited about politics. And I think I love primary campaigns because they help get people excited and bring out new people, and hopefully they stick around. I've been probably 15, 16 years now. So it's been fun. It's great to be chair of the Manchester Dems. A lot of work, but a lot of fun. And so it's great to be able to help elect Democrats up and down the ticket. And certainly we have a great city, and so there's lots of work to keep on doing.
Well, and you've certainly earned your chops. I mean, you've managed campaigns. You've worked for the Democratic Party,
Yes.
I believe, at one time or another, and now you're running the show here in Manchester. You're the top of the organization, and you've made some changes, Gene. Before we get to yesterday, I want to talk and kind of congratulate you on some of the changes you made. One of them, a great event you had this summer, just basically a picnic in the park. No lawn signs, no big speeches, but kind of just a get together to kind of build the bonds of friendship among Democrats.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think we have a monthly meeting. It's usually the second Saturday every month, and it was July, and I thought, what are we going to really do? There's lots of commitments for time. And I thought, let's do a picnic in the park, and we, literally pulled out a map and looked at which Manchester park. We have so many great ones, and we picked one, and it was just a great way, I think, to get people involved in just something that's not your normal meeting. And we didn't talk about minutes, but really just getting people to know each other, because so many people want to get involved, and it's really, I think, important that people know each other on a personal level. People brought their dog, and I brought my my puppy Zeus, and so we had folks, and we had some good food, and we talked, we got to know each other, and those are the sort of things we need to do more in Manchester. For me, I ran for chair to bring more transparency, to be able to definitely elect more Democrats at all levels, but really do more of those community events. For Democrats, we can't talk to people just during the election time. We have to talk to them, whether it's a 5K in Manchester, whether at the taco tour, we have to do all of those things. So I think events like the picnic hopefully get people sort of jazzed up and excited to keep doing the work that we need to get done.
Well, Gene, I don't want to go over old ground, but I am going to mention that you ran for chair and defeated me and in a great campaign, and the things that you're doing were kind of some of the same things that I wanted to do too. So I think that the party's in great hands, and your actions have backed up your words during the campaign. So I'm really happy with it, and I hope that that people say that there's struggles within the Democratic Party, and they try to make this equivalency with what's going on in the Republicans, and it's not even close. And there's always been factions in the Democratic Party before Bernie. You know what I mean? This is nothing new, and we know how to deal with it. And the way we deal with it is by having a big tent and big arms and embracing everything that falls within the ambit of the Democratic Party. And I think you're really doing a good job in making that happen here in Manchester. Keep it up.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So let's look back. We had a big night. One of the things I think it was John Kennedy or maybe Robert Kennedy who said, when you see daylight, go for it. And the Democrats certainly did that in the 1st Congressional District. When there's an open seat, it brings out anybody and everybody with an interest. However, we had 11 plus, maybe 13 candidates on the Democratic side. They had a whole bunch over on the Republican side. We'll get to that. But they were all really good candidates. There was, I don't think, a slouch among them. And you can go down to the results, all the way down to folks who only polled a couple hundred votes, in the below 1%. They were still quality people with great ideas, and I hope they stick around, because it looks like we may have a pretty good bench in the east side of New Hampshire here.
Absolutely. Well, I think it was the first time since 2002 that we had an open seat on either side. Obviously, we had Congressman Sununu back before he became state senator, and then you had Jeb Bradley, and so Carol Shea Porter beating Jeb. That was the first time there. So really, the first time open field. So big field for Democrats, but it was exciting. You had experienced folks who'd been around for a while. You had newcomers, and you had sort of regular people. I think everyone loved William Martin, someone that I think viewers don't know. I think maybe lucky if he got maybe more than 100 votes altogether. But but really a great guy, and he's a computer programmer. He said we need to do things more efficiently, and we could do this. And so I think we were very blessed to have 11 great candidates, and obviously the people spoke, and we're going to move forward, and we have to hold on to Carol's seat, because that could be all of them said this, but this could be the seat that gives us the majority. So who knows? But I think it's going to be an exciting election season.
It sure is. I really have enjoyed. The national media has only just picked up on it within the last 24, 36 hours, but they've been calling the first CD in New Hampshire the swingingest swing district in the country, and it really has. It's rocked back and forth between Carol and Frank Ginta. That epic political struggle that went on for 8 year after year after year. So let's before we get to that, I want to let's just work through the numbers a little bit, and I'd like to get your impression of them, because as I said earlier, you've been around a lot. You're pretty savvy. You've seen these. You've seen the internals. You know what you're talking about. For governor. Again, two great candidates. We had on the more progressive side, Steve Marchand, who's been running for a long time. He jumped in early, jumped in decisively. He's toyed with other campaigns in the past, been a little bit indecisive. A lot of people thought that might not have been smart of him. This time he came right in, came at it hard, both guns blazing. He was joined in the campaign later on by Molly Kelly, a state senator, very popular state senator, who ran, I have to say, an excellent campaign. Brief, focused, clear as a bell. Her TV ad was spot on. Could not have been better, and it showed. She won by almost 2-1, 66% to 34%. I mean. And I got to say, I was surprised by that. I thought that race was going to be a heck of a lot closer. I thought that both sides in that one would be out. So what's your thoughts on that? We had a total. I'm using the MUR. They're not quite 100%, but it looks like we had 121,200 votes cast.
That is amazing when you think about where, I think this was the first time, at least that I could remember, if you go onto the Secretary of State's website and sort of try to tool around and find the numbers, really the first time that we've had turnout like that, and that we have beaten Republicans in terms of that. I was at work at my day job, and I had a friend who was texting me in Ward 3, Manchester, and I saw the numbers, and then I went on during a break and looked at the numbers, and by the time that it was happening, Ward 3 turnout had doubled. And so I thought, wow, normally we go, at least in Manchester, it's decent turnout if there's a primary, but to have that double, and obviously that still happened in the second district, even though there wasn't a competitive congressional race. So, yes, I agree. I think a lot of folks, the conventional wisdom was that it was going to be a closer race, but I think we had two great candidates. They worked hard, one a little bit longer than the other one, but, I think, the fight's on to sort of be able to take out Sununu. But I think to be able to have, I was looking at the numbers, and what I think is interesting, if you look at the numbers from this time, if you look at the 2016 numbers versus the 2010 numbers for Republicans, they're almost identical. Looking at, they had in their gubernatorial race, when they had a big wide open field to try to lose to John Lynch, they had, about 128,000 people who voted. So you think about it, and obviously we know how that election unfortunately ended. So I think that, clearly enthusiasm's there. People, it's hard to get people out to vote. You really have to spend the time and energy to talk to people. And so the fact that what we've seen through across the country, and I think through the special elections here, people are excited to get out and vote. And we had 2 great candidates, 11 candidates in CD1. So I think people are excited to vote, and they got out there and they exercised their civic duty.
A lot of people active, too.
Absolutely.
Every one of these 11 campaigns, at least in CD1, had people working for them. So these are activists that are on the road, knocking on doors. They're a resource that's going to be available as we move forward. I did want to mention that Steve Marchand at his headquarters in Manchester gave an absolutely full-throated endorsement of Molly Kelly, and really it was an inspiring concession speech, actually, that he gave, keeping to his principles and maintaining the things that he wants to do, the more progressive things that he wants to do, but definitely indicating that Chris Sununu can be defeated.
Absolutely.
It's rare in New Hampshire for a governor to not get a second term, because everybody recognizes that our 2-term governorship is kind of short, but he's made some serious missteps, and he's got a very strong candidate coming up against him. So this is going to be an interesting couple months as we head to November.
I think it's 55 days, so we're in it.
All right. Well, we've talked a little bit about the statewide. We've talked about the first CD. Again, nice turnout. When you compare the turnout for Democrats in the first CD, I've got a number of 63,619. It might have been a little bit more than that. That's a good turnout. The Republicans were only able to muster 45,000 voters to come out, and it's not like they had a ho-hum race. They had a real barn burner as well. So I think this bodes well.
Absolutely.
For Chris, but he can't, and he won't, because he doesn't, because he's a great campaigner. He can't sit on his laurels. He's got to get out there today. I'm sure he is, and keep working. But it does look good. I think the Republican candidate with the most flash, the most name recognition statewide because of his career, I think probably won. We have a historic situation on both sides, so this is going to be a race to watch, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely. I think it will be. When you look at the number 64,000, that's the last time we've had congressional. You've had about 40,000, 36,000, so nearly almost double. I think that shows enthusiasm. I do think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You talked about, Eddie, what happens when that spotlight, because even though it's a primary, once people are focused, they're actually really paying attention to politics, that spotlight gets on you, and people start to figure out, and they really learn about you, and they pay attention. I think the political junkies and the activists who live and breathe this, obviously we saw a larger turn on the primary, but I think folks are going to be really focused on this come November. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think, obviously, Pappas has long-time roots here. Obviously, the congressional district is a third of his executive council district. So people know him, and so I think it's going to be a tough campaign. We can't take anything for granted. Obviously, Trump won it in 26. Carroll was able to manage, pulling off, I think, an upset, especially once we figured out, Trump had won that district. So it's a tough race. It's gone back and forth. You mentioned it is the swingiest of all swingy districts in the country, and so I think it's going to be prime time for the race. So we'll see what happens. I think everyone's going to sort of pile on, and it's going to be an interesting 50-something days.
Looking forward to it. We've still got more to talk about, folks. Don't forget, you can call in if you've got any questions. Gene really has a lot of knowledge packed in that cranium of his, and if you've got any questions, both politics and policy, he can handle them. So call in 640-309-91. Right now, we're going to take a quick little break, as we always do, regroup, and we'll hit some of the other election results when we get back on the other side. See you in a minute. And we're back with the Progress Report, folks. Thanks for staying with us. Thanks for all our new people who might have just joined the show. We are here tonight talking with Gene Martin, chairman of the Manchester City Democrats. And we're talking about election results. We had a primary election here in New Hampshire and here in Manchester yesterday. Had some really good turnout, I think, for a primary, and some very interesting races. And we've already talked about the governor's race. We've talked about the first CD, first congressional district. So let's go down ballot a little bit. The next race I'd like to talk about is the executive council race. And here in Manchester, we're in District 4. So that is the seat that Chris Pappas is giving up. And again, the rule applies. When there's daylight, you go for it.
Absolutely.
And so we had primaries on both sides. Not as big as the congressional primary, and I think that kind of says something about executive council is just one of those not
confusing.
Sexy positions. You know what I mean? It's just
Like,
not
what does
something.
it? What? You know, I think Chris Pappas, when he was first running, he said something that I thought was really amazing. He said, "It's the board of directors for the city of New Hampshire," and I thought that's a perfect, relatable way
really
to
is.
explain what it is, because really it's this arcane sort of thing. So I think it's hard for people to break through, especially with all the noise with the governor's race. But I thought it was interesting. Great Chinawith and Garth really have similar backgrounds in the sense that they were both the president of the Young Dems at one point. Actually, Gray, it was interesting. It was a little bit of a, not that it became this, but it was a Obama-Hillary thing a little bit, because you had Gray, who was the chair of the Young Dems. He resigned to endorse Hillary, because that position you can't endorse anyone. And then that's when Garth took over. I've known Garth and Gray for years, and it was surprising, I think, to a lot of people that it was that close. I think Garth obviously was elected. Gray went off into law and business, and so it was an interesting match. I don't think it got a lot of play. I don't think there were a lot of news stories about it. So it was interesting to see the turnout, and I think Gray clearly did a good job of focusing and getting out the vote. It was a close race, but again, I always feel bad for those candidates, because who knows what the executive council really is. So it's tough to be able to get the word out.
Well, the total turnout for Democrats was 19,243, give or take.
The drop off is so huge there. It's
Yeah,
sort of,
it's again, folks, vote the whole ballot. Don't stop when you get past the first two races. Keep going. Have some stamina, or better yet, start at the bottom and work your way up. It's really sad, but it was a close race. Gray came in with a solid majority, 56-44. Garth, probably more of a known quantity here in Manchester, but I think they kind of stood on equal footing out in the more eastern parts of the district. I know they both worked hard. I think Gray may have had a fundraising advantage. I don't think that's as important in a race like this, where you're not going up on TV. You know what I mean? It's not that kind of a thing where money can make as much of a difference, although it does. I mean, you got to get the signs out, even though they don't vote. You got to get them out there. So this, I think we had two great candidates, and I think that we've come out with a solid candidate. Gray being a newcomer to politics, I think it's good that he had a primary, that he had to go through this, because I think if he were to face a guy like the winner on the Republican side, Teddy Gatsas, without this experience, and I wonder if this was enough, he's going up against a juggernaut, a man who knows politics, who's been campaigning every day of his life for, the past 30 years, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of money. So this is going to be a real sledgehammer against sledgehammer battle, I think.
yeah, I think what's interesting is I think there's just Ted Gatsas fatigue. I mean, this seat should not. I know Resorick, after he lost, he ran for it and held it for a few years. I just don't think that the executive council should be a consolation prize for a defeated mayor. So I think it's going to be.
Well, and I think there's a big. I don't know that you can compare a Ray Resorick with a Teddy Gatsas as far as being deserving of a consolation prize. I don't want to mischaracterize, but I just think Ray Resorick was probably more beloved generally, and I use the word beloved than maybe Mayor Gatsas is at the current time.
I think it's tough. I think the best thing going for Gray is that he's new. I think chances are people have made up their mind about Ted Gatsas in one way or the other. I think from the time
The cake is baked.
The cake, and from the time, I think, if I get this right, I think he got elected in 2000 as an alderman or as a state senator, either one, and then kept running, and so up until he became mayor. So he was on the ballot every year. So people in Manchester, at least in the North End, and then obviously when he was mayor, know him. They know the name. I mean, Teddy loves the newspaper, so I mean, he has it. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see it play out. It's a tough district. Pappas, even a well-known name, obviously best chicken tenders in the world. Those were tough races. Joe Killavasser, Bob Burns twice. Those were razor thin races, and Chris worked his heart out, and the other folks did too. So it's going to come down to getting the word out and getting Democrats to keep going all the way down the ballot, which, as you saw, it's tough. That's something that you see all across the state. You do a recount and you just sort of shake your head and think, just please keep going down the ballot. So it's a lot of work for candidates.
Well, I've worked the polls many times, and at the end of the day, the write-ins and all of the hand count ballots, you can see it. It's frustrating as heck, especially when it's like 9:30 at night and you've been there since 5 in the morning, and these folks aren't even voting the whole ballot for all that effort. So, folks, vote the whole ballot. We cannot stress it enough, especially Democrats. The rest of you don't have to vote the whole ballot, but Democrats vote the whole ballot. So let's move on. We did have one state Senate seat in Manchester contested on the Republican side, and surprise, surprise, David Booton will be running against Kevin Kavanaugh up in the North End for that Senate seat. Again, turnout for that, 4,937, so we're seeing a steady decline at the bottom. Of course, smaller district. So now as far as the State House goes, I don't know that we want to get into the weeds of all the primaries. There weren't a lot of primaries, but I think we're seeing vote tallies of 2,000, 1,500. Not bad, for a primary for a state rep. So where we had kind of a drop off at the state level, I think it's a function of the candidates actually getting their voters
Absolutely.
out. You know what I mean? Because it's a smaller number. 1,000, 1,500 people is manageable. I think it's been a rule of thumb. If you can get 1,200 people to the polls, you can be a state rep.
Absolutely.
That's going to win every time. So that's your goal, folks, for all you folks that are looking to run. Get 1,200 names, call them on the day before, and get them out there.
Well, especially in the last, how many years have we had, even just in Manchester alone, probably, 5 or 6 races that have been less than 10 votes. We had a tie a few years ago when Bill Gardner had to pick lots for that. So, it really, every vote matters. And we've had a lot of newcomers who are running, and so I think that they're excited. They're already not, in my ward, I think we had nearly every, in Ward 2, we had so many new people, even though there was sort of a little bit of a primary. You had people out knocking on doors, doing what they needed to do. So I think that shows you. I was impressed at even people voting all the way about, down the ticket. It's especially those state rep races, but every vote really matters.
It really does. I can remember I had a recount. I had a 4-vote victory, which after the recount was 6 votes. Big pickup, 50% pickup. That wasn't bad, but it makes a difference. It makes a difference. Every vote counts. So folks, don't forget to get out there, get registered, and vote. Well, that kind of brings us kind of through the recap of the
Absolutely.
races that matter here in Manchester. Now we have to turn our attention. You want to talk before we? Let's get into the weeds. You said you had
Sure.
you had some numbers, kind of distilling the turnout statewide. I think. Why don't you,
Yeah, and so,
enlighten us on what we learned from what we saw
Absolutely.
yesterday.
I love, as I love numbers. I'm really a numbers wonk. And I thought it was interesting. I reached out, I talked to the party. Obviously, really, what matters in New Hampshire is the ground game. And that's something I think Democrats have really perfected. I think even Republicans would say that we've just done a better job over the years. And what I thought was interesting is looking at, besides from the primary, because, they had their own campaign separate from the party, but over 55,000 phone calls have been placed, and this was as of a week ago, to voters. So this is, I thought, stat was pretty interesting. About 50,000, so 49,000 doors at the same time, because obviously we keep data. It's 25,000 more than in 2014 when we re-elected Jean Shaheen, re-elected Maggie Hassan. So you think about it.
These are households that have already been touched by the Democratic
Exactly.
Party or a Democratic candidate saying, hey, we're out here and we're talking to
Well, and this is just the Democratic Party, just saying, are you going to vote for the Democratic ticket, not even saying any names, anything like
okay.
that. And so it's really separate. So it's really sort of holding Republicans accountable and getting people saying, are you planning to vote? And the results have been pretty fantastic. So again, that's separate. So obviously we know that the campaigns had their own, efforts, all the postcards, everything that they did getting out the vote. So you think about that, that's just the coordinated campaign. We have over 45 organizers working around the state, engaging volunteers and voters. It's really almost 1,500 active volunteers, and again, that's separate from the primary. So once all those primary folks come back into the fold, you're gonna see those numbers spike, and we're gonna. I think Republicans, don't know what's coming to them this election cycle, because we've seen with the numbers. If you look at 2010's Republican primary and the Democratic primary, it's essentially the flip of it. And so I think we could see.
And we saw a big broom sweeping Democrats out in 2010. I felt that broom myself. So
Absolutely. And so I think we could, I hate to say it's going to be a blue wave. I think we have to help make that happen ourselves. We can't just sort of, we know what happens in an election. We learned that, I think, in 2016 when we thought, oh, it's great, we're gonna have this, and it didn't turn out.
You have to actually do it.
You have to actually do. You have to actually talk to people, make sure that they're getting out to vote. So I think our candidates. I think we have great nominees. I think folks are united behind them. We have the Democratic Unity Breakfast tomorrow, and you have everyone coming together. So I'm excited. But I think these numbers, when you think about that, 25,000 more than done to date in 2014, and that's when we had nominees, because in 2014 Shaheen was already, so we already had nominees.
Yeah.
So that's impressive, and I think that's something that Republicans
and
are
it
going to
doesn't count the campaigns.
Doesn't
That's what's
count the
really
campaign.
important. I'd like to zero in on that. Because I'd like to address what I think is a misconception as to what the Democratic coordinated campaign does during the primary season. I think some people may have the impression that they kind of, put their thumb on the scale for one candidate or another. And I can understand where that comes from, because people are the people who make up the coordinated campaign are people, and they have their own preferences, but in their work, they're working strictly for the Democratic movement and not for any individual campaign.
Absolutely.
Can you kind of expound on that?
Absolutely.
I want to make that clear.
And I wish I had a copy of the palm card that they were going out with, because I thought it was really great. It was talking about, we as Democrats, here's our values, and here's what we're up against. So it really, and the word Trump doesn't appear on it. We're really talking about what our values, and really saying, hey, are you planning to vote for Democrats? Are you ready to be able to do that? And so I think that those are the conversations that are happening. I think, and I get it, I understand why there's a misconception where people are saying, oh, the coordinated or the party is putting their finger, but really they didn't go, and they, in the parlance of IDing, the coordinated campaign wasn't going out doing that. They were talking to regular people and saying, are you voting? Are you excited about voting? Do you want to volunteer? How do you want to get involved? How do you want to help, really take the
Now,
seat
going
back?
forward, they're going
Absolutely.
to totally change what they're doing out there on those doors. They're going to be identifying specific voters for specific candidates, and they're going to make sure that they go out to the polls and vote when the time comes.
Yeah.
It's a whole
It's a
different situation.
Sort of, and I think this is a great election season, because for the first time we don't have a huge Senate race, we don't have a presidential race, and so I think you're going to see a real focus on the state Senate. You're going to see a real focus on the House, in the way, when you think about it, we went through the ballot, you have the governor, member of Congress, executive council, state Senate, so really we actually get to really talk about local issues, and that's how we're organizing. And I think when you look at those 22 offices already set up, 22 coordinating offices around the state. Obviously, we have one in Manchester, 167 Elm Street. If you want to get involved, feel free to stop by. So those are the things we have. Organizers on the ground, record-breaking number of state reps in 2012 in the O'Brien years. My job was to take back the House. Terry Norelli tapped me early on in 2012. We had great special elections.
That's
and
the CHED, the Committee that elect
House
House
Democrats. So separate from the party, but that's sort of the official arm, if you will, like the DCCC, if people sort of know that. They have this year a record-breaking number of candidates. So think about it. The Bill O'Brien days of when everyone was focused. Remember, Obama was campaigning, and you used the word Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien had higher name recognition than Ovid LaMontagne at the time. And so we have a record-breaking number of people running for the House. People that just want to get involved, that want. So I think that's what's going to make the difference. It's really talking to people, texting people to remind them, hey, you're going to go out and vote. And you're building a campaign. Think about that. We've knocked on almost 50,000 doors. How many doors did the Minnie Messmer campaign knock on? The Pappas, all Andrews, all those numbers, Deglin. Add those all up to get those votes, because people just don't show up. 64,000 people don't show up just by accident. You have to do the work to get them there. So when you add that in there, we're talking to people, and we're talking about Sununu, we're talking about all those sort of things. So I think when we now that we're together, we're having a number of unity canvas kickoffs this weekend, and so we're going to talk about the ticket. We're going to talk about why it's important to send Chris to DC to elect Molly. So I really feel good about this election. We have a lot of work to do. I'm always cautiously pessimistic in a way. You got to sort of worry, but that's what's going to happen. But those numbers are really amazing. And having a great primary, I love primaries because you're getting new people involved. Minnie Messmer got new people involved. Deglin, those are new people. All those people who come to those events. I think Steve did a fantastic job. He started, I think, in either March or April of 2017. He was those house parties. Those people are organized, and I don't think they're just gonna. He talked pretty always about Sununu and why we needed a new governor, and they're going to be there in November to complete that vision that he was laying out.
What's the party going to do to keep the people who didn't make it through? And you mentioned a couple: Deglin McEachern, Terrence O'Rourke. I love that guy.
I love Terrence.
We got to keep him active. Out there in the seacoast where he lives, and just because he didn't make it to Congress doesn't mean there's not a great role for him to make policy here in New Hampshire. Is the party going to work to keep those guys involved?
Absolutely. Because
I've seen a lot of candidates. I've seen a lot of primaries where people rise up, they bubble up to the top, and then we don't hear from them again. And I'm thinking Justin Nato, for example. Great guy, but I haven't seen him really involved in Democratic politics since his run for Congress. And
I think that our chairman, Ray Buckley, a state chairman, I think he would be happy to have anyone and everyone involved. And I think that's on the candidates. You think about Jackie Silly. I interned in the state Senate with Maggie and Jackie, and two great, fantastic people.
You mentioned a great, she was my candidate. I love Jackie Silly.
Jackie Silly, absolutely fantastic. She had an office right next door to Betsy DeVries, who I worked with. Great friends with her, and that was a tough loss. She got back involved. She organized, and then she ran for the House, and it was a great. And I was sad to see that she stepped away from it. I get the family consideration, but she did a great job being a great voice in the legislature. And so I think candidates have to figure out what works for them. Are they going to get involved more civically? Are they going to be part of the party, their committee? Are they going to run for maybe another office? I think they have to figure out what works for them. But I think we want them to be involved. The whole point of the Democratic Party, in my opinion, is to have a big tent, have people active, because we win with addition, not with subtraction.
Well, I think that's, I couldn't agree more. The great Lou D'Alessandro has always said politics is a game of addition, not a game of subtraction, and no truer words were spoken. With that, we come to our second break. We are going to take a quick break and look around and see if Bob Backus might be coming nearby. Otherwise, we'll soldier on without him. Folks, we hope that you will come back after this quick break and join us for the last part of the Progress Report. See you in a second. And we are back for the third and final segment, as Bob calls it, of the Progress Report. We have been talking about the primary election that took place yesterday here in Manchester and throughout the state of New Hampshire, obviously from a Democratic Party perspective a little bit. We've touched a little bit on the Republicans, but we make no bones about it. We are a left of center program, and we like to focus on those things. So we're going to soldier on with that. Our guest today is Gene Martin, longtime Manchester resident, fellow Ward 8 resident for many years, and current chairman of the Manchester City Democrats. And coming off of, I think this is your first election as chairman.
Yes.
Did a great job with turnout. Have you slept at all? I mean, did you get any sleep last night?
It was, it's one of those things. It's always nerve wracking because you never know what's going to happen. Because I commute to work, and so I got back from work, and luckily, the moderator said, literally, Gene, where are you? You have 28 minutes left to vote. So it's sort of, one of those things. But it was a quick night. I was surprised by that. But I'm excited. We have our meeting coming up, so we're getting ready for that. So lots of things coming up. Post primary, we only have 50-something days left to go.
Well, let's talk about those. We've got 50 days. Folks watching this show, I think they watch for a reason. They're interested in what's going on the more progressive side of things in politics. We talk about a lot of stuff here, but we do talk a lot about politics. If I'm watching the show and I want to find out, hey, I'd like to help Chris Pappas. What's coming up in the next couple weeks, couple months? Where would they go?
Absolutely. Well, first thing that they can do is really stop by our office, 167 Elm Street in Manchester. It's right by Good Training and Spider Bite right over the corner there on Elm.
Dunkin' Donuts, right kind of across from the Dunkin' Donuts on Elm Street next to the Dead River Company, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right there. So I think that's one thing, they can go to their website, manchesterdemocrats.org, and they can sign up, again, on our email list. We have a meeting coming up this Saturday, 9:30. You can come for the best coffee and donut holes that Manchester has to offer.
Direct from that Dunkin' Donuts across the street,
Exactly.
I think. Right?
Direct from the Dunkin' Donuts right across the street. So, that's really great. They could follow us on Facebook and Twitter, Manchester Dems. But really, I think getting involved, it's one of those things, Granny D always used to say that democracy it has to be something that we do. And so I think we have to get involved with it. If you don't like what's going on in Washington, if you don't like what's going on at the state capitol, it's really on us to get involved. So I think it's reaching out, show up to the meeting Saturday at 9:30. We're going to have a meeting, and then we're going to go off and start to talk to voters. And so, we're going to do that. So at 10, 1, and at 3, for the next, number of weeks, we're going to get out there talking to people. But really, it's whatever people want to do. I say knocking on doors are important, making phone calls. But if you want to do postcards and you want to talk to people, if you want to help, make sure to text 10 friends. They'll let them know about voting. It's really about what we could do. If you want to go and do visibility, we do that usually every Friday, so you can reach out to us and email Gene, Gene, at manchesterdems.org to be able to do that, and we'll get back to you and we'll sort of plug you in. So really, it's folks reaching out, manchesterdems.org, and we'll find a way to put you to work trying to save the republic here.
And that's no smaller task than that. And even if you're not sure, if you don't think you got the legs to go knocking door to door, or
you
you're
can drive someone,
or a little shy and you really don't like to make cold calls, even if you just want to come and spend an hour with a bunch of charged up fellow Democrats and just kind of get your Democratic juices juiced a little bit, so you can go out and maybe just talk to a few of your friends. Every little bit helps. Every little pebble in the pond sends a ripple out there, and people get more involved. So it's a very welcoming group of people. That's the other thing you got to know. This is not a closed system here. We want more and more people to get involved. So you'd be welcome this Saturday, 9:30. Show up at the headquarters and see a City Dems meeting. See how things get run and how we put together the campaigns. I think that's a great thing. What other? You talked about a unity breakfast. Is that something that people could get involved in?
I know it's something the NHC puts on. I just saw an email. It's sold out, unfortunately. But I think in the next few days, whether you send me an email, you reach out. come to the meeting on Saturday. We're going to get folks involved. Obviously, we have a lot of things that are coming up, and to what your point is, if you want to volunteer, there's a job to be done, whether it's, even if it's, we call them comfort captains, if it's just dropping off, cookies at the office. Obviously, I know we saw each other recently because you stopped by to bring pizza. Those sort of things. I was an organizer. I worked on campaigns. Those, and I say kids, but the folks, the staff, the volunteers, you're working 80, 90 hours a week in those offices. So anything that people can do to sort of help makes a difference. But really, it's talking to neighbors. That's how we win elections. That's how we reelected Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan in 2014. And I think even in New Hampshire, obviously that helped Maggie be our senator. I mean, we wouldn't have the ACA. I say that all the time. Less than 1,000 votes stopped her from Kelly Ayotte. We'd be in a very different place in the U.S. Senate. So that's people. She went around the state thanking people for helping get her elected, because it was the knocking on doors. You think even Joyce Craig, 64 votes. Those number of years ago. It's the shoe leather that gets it happen. So we need folks to get involved and help out. So hopefully they'll stop by the meeting or reach out to me, and we'll get them plugged in.
Correct, and there's a job for every hand. If you're really lazy like me, and you can just bring a pizza.
Well, if you want to hold, signs at the day of the polls, that's something I think is really great, because, again, the best thing is to be able to talk to voters one-on-one. But I think being at the polls, and you've done it for how many years? Although I missed Jewett Street School in Ward 8, but to be able to be out there and have regular people see you. It makes a difference. I really believe that. So there is a job for anyone. If you have a special talent, we had at Art Jam, whether it's tabling on events just to get out the message, Kate, I'd have to give a shout out to her. Hopefully she's watching, but she's been really fantastic. We had a great mural that's up in the office that folks around Art Jam painted for us. It's the Manchester scape. It has Manchester. It's our city, our home. Really nice. But those are the kind of events we're getting out all across Manchester to sort of let people know that we're here and how to get involved with us.
Well, super. And this is going to go on, right, Gene? This is something where we're trying to get away from the cycle of showing up at people's doors in September every year. We're trying to make this an organization that is active and working toward the greater good year-round.
Absolutely.
So while we're focusing here through November, it's not going to end there. We're going to keep going right through the following summer to support the candidates that win, and to come up with new candidates who can win in the next one.
Absolutely. The lucky thing about Manchester, or depending on what you think of as luck, is that we have an election every year. So we'll have the municipal election coming up, obviously, 2019, we're going to have presidential candidates. We already have 2 coming this weekend. So it's going to be, and if anything, election's going to happen. I think we're going to see it get even busier, which is going to be, we're already at primary time. So it's going to be a long process, but, we're going to keep getting involved. We're not going to close shop. We're going to try to, our lease is up at this office, but we're going to try to open up another office. We're going to keep folks engaged and on board, because pretty soon we have another election coming up, and we want people to be involved. The one thing about Manchester, we have a great city, and we need folks to get involved and be involved, not just from August and November, but really from January on down. So there's plenty of ways to get involved, and I always love to hear ideas. We've been doing it for a while, but I love sort of a new idea. I think Kate did a great job of Art Jam. I've heard about that for, I think it's going on 8 years. Never thought to go to that. That's something we need, new ideas, new energy, and so I love it. So I think that's what we have to keep on doing.
Being in every part of the community. Well, we do have a caller on the line. We've got Stella. Stella, you're live on the Progress Report. Thanks for calling. What have you got to say?
Hi, I was calling about this Maura Sullivan.
Mm-hmm.
I looked on my computer. I couldn't find any information about her. I don't know where she came from. Don't know anything about her background, what college she went to, where she graduated from, and the only thing I heard was that she was in the Marine Corps and worked for...
there's a delay on the TV. You may want to turn your TV down. Sometimes it can get confusing.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Let me turn it down. Yeah. And I don't have any information about her, so... I mean, I don't know. I know she had a lot of money backing her up, $800,000. It was in the paper. I read that. But why didn't she have any information about her background in the paper?
Well, I think that's a good question. Gene, maybe we can take a few minutes
Yeah,
to talk
absolutely.
about. Thanks for the question, Stella. We'll talk about that a little bit. She brings up that's a point that's kind of was an issue throughout the campaign. Maura Sullivan ran an excellent campaign for the first CD. She did have a lot of money, but she didn't focus on where she was from and all that, and I think for very good reason, because her connection with New Hampshire, I think it's fair to say, was very tenuous at best. She's originally from Illinois, as I understand. She was in the Marines, and that entails a lot of moving around. She did work in Washington, D.C., but I hope I'm not speaking falsely when I say it looks like she kind of picked this race out of personal ambition as opposed to out of kind of a more grassroots for New Hampshire kind of a motivation. And I always don't. I hate to question people's
Well,
motivations.
that's the thing.
It's
When
tricky, but
when I met with her, all the candidates who reached out to me wanted to grab coffee. We talked, and and I want to believe what she says, and what she says is that she came here and she visited. I was born in Massachusetts. My parents used to come up we didn't go skiing, but we went to vacation up in the North Country and see Storyland and all those sort of things. My parents fell in love with it. So I mean, when she says that she fell in love with New Hampshire, I believe her.
It's not hard to believe. I agree with you,
It's an easy thing to do. When the first time she bought a house, she wanted to buy it in Portsmouth. She went to grad school in Boston. Obviously, her and her husband are connected to military, so they love the community of Pease. A lot of vets live there. I get that, and so I think they bought a house in Portsmouth. Portsmouth is the second greatest community in the state of New Hampshire, obviously after Manchester. So Stella, I don't want to question her her motives. I think she obviously had a unique experience in the race, having worked in the administration. Obviously having served in the Marines. I think that was a unique perspective, and I think she talked about her issues, and she did have a lot of money. But I think she came in second. But I think everyone has the right to run for office. It doesn't matter how long you've lived here, other than your age. Really, that's the only thing. All you have to do is be 25 to run for Congress. So she
naturally focused on the positives of her resume and diminished the negatives. That's not uncommon in politics. I think I've seen that before.
You always have to play to your strengths, and I think she did a great job to that. And I think it was, a nail biter. She was on.